Good afternoon, and welcome to the Illuminos and SAOTG Less Stress Parenting webinar. Today, we are featuring Dan Jordan with Accessing College, where he is going to talk to us about getting your children with disabilities what they need in their colleges. Hopefully, you will enjoy this, and we look forward to seeing you next month as well.
A few things that I want to go over real quick administratively. First, welcome everybody from the DC metro area and other areas, as well as the Houston area. I will let Evan do his own Houston introduction in a moment. We will be recording this webinar as we do all of them, and you will have it available to you on our website within the next 2 weeks. So you can feel free to share it with others, or you can come back, you don't have to take notes, and watch it again at your leisure. With that, I would like to turn it over to Evan real quick so he can say hi to his constituents, and then we will jump right in and get started with Dan so we don't cut off any of his time. So thanks again for joining us, Evan.
We're so excited to have everybody here. For those of you in and around staying ahead of the game here in Texas, joining us, warm welcome to you and everyone from joining from all over. We're so lucky to have Dan impart some of his knowledge and experience with us. Hope you enjoy it. To remain notified about upcoming webinars for us, please follow our social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram. That information will be given to you here later, but that is the best way to stay informed, as well as our newsletters. So excited to be getting families knowledge when and where they need them, and this is such an important topic affecting so many. So Dan, thank you so much for your time, your generosity, and everything you're about to share with us. And take it away.
Yeah, thanks. I'll share my screen first off. There we go. So let's see. There we go. All right. All right. So that's my dogs. Sorry. I have 3 of them. So just got a new puppy the other day. So they're kind of all getting along tremendously well. So this is about college transition. And I know the title says for students with disabilities. It is a broad spectrum of stuff that can happen with students with disabilities. It covers a lot of different areas, but I'm not covering all of that. I'm not going to be talking about physical disabilities. I will be talking about learning disabilities, mental health, ADD, ADHD. Those things I have most experience in. I dealt with some of the physical disabilities, not so much, but I dealt with a lot of these categories primarily. And so for these college-bound students who have learning disabilities, as my son does, he has dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, and he's just finishing up his freshman year. And some of the information that I have on here is actually with his input, to be quite honest. So my promise to all of you is that you're going to have a sense for the transition into a college mindset. You got used to K through 12 in the IEP process, 504 process. This is a complete shift. So if you shift your mind into the college process and it's giving you an introduction into that, you're going to be much better off so that you're not fighting what you used to know and trying to apply that to college, which it doesn't apply, but you won't have to fight so much with that. You're going to transition your mindset into something that's more appropriate for college with all of that. And if you're a first generation parent, there's an awful lot of first generation students that are all out there. And even if you've been to college before, as a parent, it's definitely different for those who have hidden disabilities. Their experience is going to be something completely different. So this will help you transition into that. And so you're going to get to know how the transition affects all those with hidden disabilities, but also understanding what a normal transition is for every student. And you'll be able to understand how that normal transition is going to affect those with hidden disabilities. And so it's going to help you transition your student better because you're going to be having the information so that you can help them transition in a way that makes sense for them. So you're going to be able to look out for the pitfalls when they typically will happen, so you can help support your student as best you can, and also know the resources that are out there for college for students as well. So that's my promise at the end of all of this. It's a lot to get to in half an hour, so let's do it. So this is about me. I've been doing accessibility for 10 and a half years. I served a dual role, and then pretty much I'm entering my 14th year. I'm finishing my 14th year in college, and I am a therapist by vocation. It's what I love to do, but I did do accessibility. It was a small college campus. It's still a small college campus. I'm still there. And pretty much my son has dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So I'm walking this walk and have walked it a little bit further ahead than some of you that might be going through this for the first time. So here's a normal college transition, normal college stuff. College is absolutely different in every single way. So K through 12, you had 7:30 to 2:30, everything's all structured. That's not the case in college. You may have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, a schedule that looks like there's a tremendous amount of open time. And you may have a class at 9 o'clock in the morning and nothing until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Tuesday, Thursday, you have a class at 10, 11:15, and another lab probably, in the afternoon on a Thursday. So that's a completely different structure, and having a schedule, that's fine. So you can get to class, that's fine. But implementing routine and structure is up to each individual student. The academics are really harder and more complex than they were in high school. That hits students really hard. And so that's an area to expect that it's going to be a little more robust, and there's a lot more to do, and you're not going to be finishing homework in class, let's say. So that's not going to happen. You are going to get homework. That's definitely going to happen. The social aspects of college too are different because you may be exposed to a whole array of individuals from many different backgrounds, even international, if your school has that capability. Larger schools will have that. And the responsibilities in college are all on the student. And this may be something as simple as you have to do your own laundry. You have to make your own doctor's appointments. You have to know where to go and how to request things on campus. And all the way up to learning about what your responsibilities are as a student with a disability. So those responsibilities are for pretty much everybody. Everybody has that. And the first semester is really key. So if you adjust really well, and the need to adjust, some students will adjust really quick and some will need a little bit more time. And this next tip is from my son. It came out of a conversation that I had with him on the way back from college, picking him up. And I said, surviving it is kind of the point. Like, you just have to survive your first semester. He said, absolutely not. That's completely wrong, Dad. You have to learn how to be a college student. I never knew how to be a high school student, and I never really wanted to, but here I'm invested and I need to learn what I need to do to be a successful college student. And that was really hard. But once I got my feet wet and I kind of knew about that, then I know what I need to do. So that's definitely a tip from him. I thought it was like, hey, survive it, get through it. It might be clunky, we'll learn afterwards. He's like, no, learn how to be a college student. And I'm like, got it, thank you. So the next one is know how to be well. And if you have a wellness plan that keeps you well, keeps you active, keeps the stress down, and know how to do school even when you're stressed, that's really kind of a complete key to a lot of the information. So I take kind of a holistic approach. You need to know how to be well and how to do things, even when you might be having a little bit more stress than you normally would. And so typically, if you transition really well, then you're going to have less stress, you're going to do better in school. And the opposite is also true. So if you don't transition well, you don't learn how to be a college student, you don't have a wellness plan, guess what? You're probably not going to do as well. And that's unfortunate. Some don't have the capability to adjust as much. But if you can learn to do that, then you do better. That's normal for every single student. But now we have like on the first semester. So we have some things to expect and common issues that happen first semester. So September is usually la la land. Everybody's happy, everybody's excited to go. You should be. That's really important. But it's also a time to set up your routine and structure. It's also a time to get used to where things are on campus. You get to know where you kind of need to go to the health and wellness center, for example, or the tutoring center, or any of those particular things. You're going to need to know where they are. September is the month to fill that in. You're not going to have many tests. You're going to have homework, but you're not going to have many tests. Why? Because that hits October, and October usually hits like a ton of bricks. It's really difficult, and students who are not expecting that get very overwhelmed once October hits, and they're like, "Whoa, what happened? I have an awful lot of stuff to do, and you have 2 papers, you have 2 tests, you have a quiz, and you have a presentation to do, all within the same 10-day period." And that doesn't let up until December, basically. November, you kind of have a little break, and that's really kind of a great thing. And students really enjoy that, but then it's back to the races again, and the starting gun has already gone off, and you're just joining in the race until finals happens. And think of what that happens. Think of what that stress might be like if you're not, 1, expecting it, and 2, if it does happen and you are overwhelmed, what's that happening to any of the particular issues that you may face? And we know that students who have learning disabilities have some comorbidity with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. So think of how those particular symptoms may be affected by the stress that happens once October hits, on top of all the social issues that may happen as well with not getting along with your roommate, come October. So all of that is on top of any accommodations or any responsibilities that you may also have. Now, it's not to scare anybody. I'm not trying to scare anybody. It's really to make sure that you're aware of the potential pitfalls that happen in the first semester. In the spring semester is pretty much the same. January, kind of February, half February is kind of the same. And then you hit March and April, and half February, and then March and April, it's the same kind of thing as October. Once October hits, stress happens. Same thing in March and April. It just doesn't end until, finals kind of happen. So spring semester just doesn't mimic the same thing as fall. So to transition into a college mindset, this gets into some of the legal issues and some of the orientation to what happens when you have a disability and you want to have accommodations in college. So the college mindset is like, just get rid of everything you know from K through 12. It just doesn't apply. And I'll tell you why in just a second. The different laws, because your child's now an adult. And the main difference, and this is a huge difference, and this may help with requesting accommodations and knowing what to request and what not to request even. Access, high school is all about success. College is about access. And so access has nothing to do with success unless you kind of have access and you have what you need, then you can actually show what you know. And that will lead to success most of the time. But high school, those IDEA and 504 for that were all about success. College is about access, and that's pretty much it. Success is up to the student. And so you can think of it in a different framework for that. And so accommodations, although they may be different and can be different, colleges are not bound by an IEP. They're not bound by the assessment. They're bound by whatever it is that's going to give access to the student. So sometimes they can do more than what was done before. So keep that in mind as well. So it's not just an all or nothing thing. And just because they can be different, don't be scared by that. So, but there's a process to request accommodations. And so think of the process to request accommodations as more of an eligibility process, because you have to be deemed eligible for the accommodations so you can use them. So that has to happen first. And with the student responsibilities, such as how are instructors notified, students may be responsible for that at the school that you may be attending. And so having and using accommodations is also part of those responsibilities, but it's also, do they have them and are they using them, and what happens if they don't use them? like test accommodation. So you may have taken that test in the classroom. What happens if you don't use your test accommodations for that particular test? So there's lots to know and lots to be oriented to once you kind of start thinking about having accommodations and orienting yourself to that college mindset. So with the college laws, these are, sorry, my bad. Hey, hold up. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So the college mindset for the laws, college, yes, they have ADA in both of them. IDEA is really for high school. Section 504 is subpart D for high school. Section 504 for subpart E, that's for college. They are substantively different laws. They have different content to navigate high school, and 504 plans for high school don't transfer over to college because it's a different subpart. And the emphasis obviously is success. I said that before, but you also have the emphasis for college's access, because ADA and 504 for those subparts have access as their primary function. FERPA is also one of those. So this is like a precursor for all the parents out there. Your student is not obligated, the school is not obligated to communicate anything to you because of FERPA. Now you can ask for a FERPA waiver, and some of you may kind of ask your student for one of those, and the student's going to need to be able to fill one of those out so you can communicate with the school as well. So, but FERPA says they're an adult. They don't have to tell you anything. The Fair Housing Act, so if you're living in the residence halls, Fair Housing Act will apply too. Now, basically, I'm going to be covering the ADA 504 subpart E. So we'll kind of go through that. So what does it really mean? So like I said before, IEPs and 504 plans don't transfer. They end at graduation. So that's at subpart D, subpart E section. Subpart D, just high school. So once you graduate, it doesn't transfer over. So I still hear today an awful lot of people saying, wow, I thought 504 plans transfer over. They don't. You have to be aware of that so you're not frustrated and you kind of understand that everything stops. And so students are also responsible for requesting accommodations and speaking about their disability to the accessibility staff. That means you're probably going to be interviewed about your disability, about what's going on with it, how it affects you, and all of that. And schools will ask for documentation to corroborate that particular issue, to say what is really going on, and you have documentation to go ahead and back that up. Now, schools can ask for documentation. Typically they will, but each school may have their own guidelines for that. So you're going to need to check when you're looking at different schools that you may be choosing, and you may get offers from different schools. You may have to check with each school to figure out what documentation requirements fit for your particular issue. And so, like I said before, it's an eligibility process, and it's a very simple process, really. There's some forms to fill out with some demographic information, what kind of accommodations you're requesting, and you have to submit some documentation according to what their policy and what their guidelines are for that. And most likely, depending on the school, you're going to have to interview with the accessibility staff to explain what you need and why you need it that way. And once you're eligible, once all of that happens and they say, okay, you are a student with a disability and you have the need for these reasonable accommodations, then the student has further responsibilities of what they need to do for those accommodations. So my son has books in an alternate format. Okay, well, what do we need to do to make sure that we get those books in an alternate format? That's a whole separate process other than the eligibility process that you just went through. Also, how are instructors notified of the accommodations that they may have? That may differ from school to school. And so that information is probably important for some students who have a hard time remembering to actually turn in a letter to an instructor versus another school that may have a different process that may help out. And so I encourage everybody to get familiar with, if you're looking at schools, and so if there's individuals out there who are in their sophomore, junior year, even senior year, and you're looking at different schools, get familiar with where the ODS office, sorry, words are a little bit hard today. ODS just means Office of Disability Services. It may be called something completely different, accessibility services, accessibility office. So that may be something that's there too. But get familiar with it, get familiar with the staff, get familiar with where it is, get familiar with the information on their webpage. The policies and procedures will help guide you in terms of what you need to do. Especially the documentation requirements for your particular issue, learning disabilities being a little more complicated than some, but you have to go through that. For mental health, that's different than learning disabilities. And also with ADHD, some schools may require that you have like a neuropsych eval for ADHD, versus some may have something that's a little bit different. So know what they are for all of that. The services that are supplied by the ODS office may be a lot. They may take care of the testing right there. They may not. They may have tutors that are also responsible for that and may be housed in the academic resources stuff. So get to know what services they have and how to navigate that. And also, when do you apply for the accommodations? Most schools, and I can't speak for everybody, but most schools will have you apply for the accommodations pretty much right after you get accepted. So if you get that acceptance letter, you can start applying, but you're going to have to check with each school to know exactly what that is. Some schools may require you to do that after you've registered for classes. So that may be the case. I don't know of any school that would actually do that, but I can't speak for every school, but check with the school themselves because each school may be also doing that a little bit differently. For the accommodations, these are just some general tips. And I experienced this an awful lot when I was doing work, and I would have students that would wait or not do it until their junior year. I advise everybody, don't wait. Get them anyway. Even if your student is saying, I don't really kind of think I need them, that's fine. Do it anyway. Why? Because here's the next stuff. Students who wait to get accommodations are 3.5 times more likely not to graduate. 350% more, less likely. That's an oxymoron. 350% less likely to graduate. That's a huge statistic. And if you do wait, I've seen this happen just anecdotally in my own kind of time doing it, but GPAs do get lower if you don't have what you need. So get them and do that process anyway, even if your student thinks that they're not going to need them, or if they say, yeah, I just need a couple of things. I don't know, freshman year is kind of easy. Do it anyway, because October just may hit, and it may hit in a way that you didn't expect. And now you have to wait for that entire process to go through because it's October, everybody's on campus. And so you may have to wait a little bit longer to do the things that you need to do and get that process done, that eligibility process done. So as soon as you can, go through that process with each school so that you can learn what accommodations are there for each school that you might be going through. So just do it anyway and get it done. So helpful resources. So knowing that college is difficult, you just may need some resources for your student. The top two, instructor office hours and library staff, they are the least used, but they are the most helpful, to be quite honest. Instructor office hours, it's like going to class. Again, you can get the instructor to do that part of the lesson that you're having trouble with all over again. And it connects the students with the instructor. Even if you don't like the instructor, instructors want students to do well. I've never met an instructor that didn't want that. I'm sure they're probably out there somewhere, but I've never met an instructor that did not want to answer a question for a student. Instructor office hours build that connection between you and the professor. So I highly encourage that one. Library staff, same thing. They will walk you through what you need to do for research and pretty much help you gather the information. They will walk you through a lot of that stuff. They love interacting with students, and it saves you an awful lot of time. Academic Resource Center, that's where you get tutoring. Now, you also have to understand that tutoring may be different than what you've experienced before. It may be from another student, and it may be in a group setting too. So when you're doing your college search and you're doing things there, you may have to look at what the specifics are for the academic resources and the services they provide there, because it may not be one-on-one tutoring, let's say. And also for your student, you may, your academic resource center may offer academic coaching, which takes a student through what do you need to do this week, next week, the week after, and walks that student through that process. Not every school has that, but you may check with the academic resource center or the academic services to know that. Counseling, same thing. It may be limited. Where I'm at, we don't have limits on session time or how many sessions. Most schools will. Most schools will, especially larger ones with larger populations. They will have that. So know that that's there. Also, the Health and Wellness Center may also kind of have some restrictions there too. Office of Disability Services, we went over some of that. But also you have spiritual kind of assistance that may be important for your son or daughter as well. And social. So we can't ignore the social stuff. We can't ignore being connected to other people, meeting new friends, meeting with other students who may be doing the same types of things that you're doing, and being connected. We know that research will tell us that if the more connected students are to a campus, the better off they are. Mental health wise, but also grade wise, they do better if they feel connected to the people, the staff, and the other students there. If they have a healthy, robust social life and feel connected there, they will do better. That's just how it is. So we also know that when you're doing this college transition, it is not just about your student. It's about you too. Parents have a role not only in having the information and helping each student, their student along if they experience issues in October, let's say, okay, well, now you have some information to do that with. But you also have to take care of yourself too. And how do you take care of your student as well as taking care of yourself? Well, part of it is having the information on hand to know what services are there, but also keeping in contact. And I would advise every parent to have a discussion with their student about how much contact they need to have, when, how often, what types. Is texting enough? Is once a week phone call kind of okay? It may be different for mom or dad or both. It may be completely different, but have some type of contact that is meaningful for your student. And when you do have that contact, listen. That's your primary target, is listening for the information. How are they doing? How are they adjusting? What's their stress and anxiety like? You really need to keep an eye on those two, because stress and anxiety are the top two issues that will make or break a particular college experience. So I see it all the time. They are the top two. Every college student will tell you the same thing. Stress and anxiety are the top two issues that most students will say affect them personally. Also pay attention to personal changes that may happen as well. That may include anything from breaking up with a significant other, or all the way to the personal changes that may be going through just with a roommate, or their own development, their own mistakes, which will happen. Expect that. And so encouraging them to walk through that, to problem solve what they need to do, not solving the problem for them. It's the reason for having this information that I have for you, so you can help them navigate it in the best way. Again, you're walking the walk first. You're kind of knowing what's there, but also helping them and encouraging them to go ahead and solve that. So you can encourage them, hey, you have a lot of stress and anxiety. It might be time to go to the Academic Resource Center and get some help for that subject. Or if you have anxiety, you might need to go to both. You might need to go to the Academic Resource Center, but also the college services, counseling services. So that may help them, push them along to problem solve why they're going or not going. And so do they use the campus resources? And if they're not using them, why are they not using them? Why do they not think that that's an appropriate thing for them to use at the particular moment? Don't wait to go to counseling. I would tell you that. Don't wait to go to counseling until it's too late. Don't do that. Do it soon. Do it often. do it as much as you can, and get the help. That goes for academic resources and any of the other resources. But you also have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself too. If there's a top-down approach, it's pretty much take care of you, and then you're better off to take care of everybody else, which means they may have siblings, you may have other issues going on in your own life. And the more you take care of that, the better off you are with taking care of a student that's in college who may not necessarily be in your house. They may be somewhere else. And I can tell you just from personal experience, them not being in your house is a lot of anxiety. I can tell you that right off the bat. That's a tremendous amount. And so I did not expect that, to be quite honest. I don't know why. I talk about it all the time. I was blindsided by it. I thought maybe that's my own sort of arrogance a little bit, but I was blindsided by it. I don't want you to be blindsided by that. I want you to take care of yourselves, and make sure that you're doing as well as you can, so you can look out for your student who's in college. So hopefully that resonates with you. So thanks. That's the information I got for right now. And I am really looking forward to some of those questions. I really am. So you can find me in all these. This is my social media stuff. I also do a podcast after the IEP, where you can get a lot more information. I love doing it. So with that, do Q&A.
Thanks, Dan. Oop, I lost you there for a second. Let me see what we have in the Q&A. So we have, let's see, one question here. Looking at colleges, how can you find out which schools have good accessibility issues?
Ask. If you're going to look at colleges, and you're going on a tour, ask to speak with somebody in the accessibility office right off the bat. You can set that up with your college counselor, or with anybody that's available to, or whoever you're contacting to do the tour. You can either set that appointment up after you do the tour or before you do the tour. When you do the tour, you may be with a whole bunch of other individuals. So that might not be the most appropriate time to ask those questions. But if you're asking about accessibility, you're asking about how do they manage accessibility for their particular students? It's a great question. And you may get, if you visit 4 schools, you may get 4 separate answers. So it's really important for you to do that homework to find out how they answer that specific question for their particular population. And everybody's going to be nice. It's not necessarily about being nice. It's about what they do and how they do it. And is that appropriate? And is that something that meets what your student needs? So I'm fond of saying you go to the school that you need, not necessarily the one that you want. If you can do both, score. That's awesome. But you need to go to the school that's going to help support your student in the best way possible. And the accessibility people are one part of that discussion. The other support services that I talked about, that's the other part. So whatever your student needs, that you're trying to get them the best support possible. One, what are they going to use? How are they going to use it? And does the school actually have that?
And keep in mind, the term accessibility department is a generic term. So every school has a different name for this department. It may be the Center for Students with Disabilities. And so you need to do a little bit of research about the school and ask some questions about what that office is called to make sure you get connected to the right folks. But yeah, they're nice and friendly, and everybody, it's all toward just making sure that students all have an equal chance to show what they know and to be supported and be successful.
So a couple more questions. When you say that the colleges ask for documentation, are you including a high school 504 or IEP? And part 2 of the same question, are there any databases to search to look for colleges that have the accessibility?
All colleges will have an accessibility office. All post-secondary training and colleges will have somebody who does accessibility work. So if you're thinking of going into a trade school will have somebody at the trade school that will do the same work that I did, and the same thing that colleges do. All of them are required to have that. So they will have that. Documentation for, can you read the first part of that question?
Sure. When they need documentation, will it include the high school IEP or 504?
It may not. 504 plans are rather generic sometimes. And so 504 plans just may be supplementary to help with, hey, you have a history of something, but usually a 504 plan is based on something else. So let's say it's anxiety and you have a mental health condition. Well, the 504 plan is like, okay, you did have some accommodations in high school. Fabulous. That tells us exactly what was addressed there. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't do more or something else or enhance those particular things. We can, but the documentation from the school just says that you had something. It doesn't tell me from I need something from either your psychiatrist or your therapist, somebody that can diagnose that particular issue. Your school can't diagnose that issue. Your school counselor may kind of be able to sort of, point you in the right direction, but it's really somebody outside the school that's going to go and diagnose that condition. That's where I need the documentation from. Your school is going to need that from somewhere. IEPs, this gets into a little bit of a sticky kind of area, but IEPs generally are not going to be the full documentation that's needed. You need the evaluation that got them on to that IEP. So the IEP, some schools, and I can't speak for all of them, some schools may have some flexibility with that. And so they may just take the IEP as long as you're just requesting something very simple, like extra test time and maybe distraction reduced environment. They may kind of need that. And so that may be all you need. But if you need something more than that, it may sound simple to have a calculator, but an IEP is not going to give me the data by which to know that you have a calculation kind of disability. Does that make sense? So that's a tough question. So you really have to do your homework to know, one, what are you requesting for your accommodations? Does it meet sort of what the documentation requirements are for that school? Are they flexible? And we know sometimes this happens. I've seen it, and it happens a lot, that student will be evaluated like in third grade. And because of the school district, you're not having another evaluation at all because your accommodations and your stuff just didn't change. And so it doesn't really give me very much information. So you have to look at the documentation requirements for the school that you're going to or may go to, and ask them what flexibility there is. There may be some flexibility. There may not be with some. And that goes to each school has their own documentation requirements. So typically, IEPs are not necessarily the only documentation that you're going to need. You're going to need something like an evaluation. And that gets into a whole other discussion of, do I need another evaluation? I can't answer that question. You're going to need to know what the documentation requirements are. You're going to need to know how old your evaluation is. And if it's like 5, 6 years old, there may be some flexibility there. But I can't really speak to, do you need another one? And that's something that's a process to figure all of that out. But basically, IEPs are not going to be sufficient documentation.
Yeah, I can add.
I
can add also that, we recommend that parents redo neuropsychs and psychoeducation evaluations every 3 to 4 years. Many of the schools in our area require it, but more so, your kids can really change. So, the accommodations may need to change and how their learning may change. So we don't recommend getting the third grade evaluation and holding on to that until you go through college, but instead, every 3 years, getting that evaluation done on the long end, 4 years.
Correct.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're sharing is that they're looking for both justification and they're looking for history. And so the justification is, the neuropsych, psychoeducational testing, et cetera. And then the history is that a student has received certain accommodations at different levels of their education as they've matriculated and utilized those. But the specific requirements can vary as far as how recent those things need to be, how much history that they want, et cetera.
Right.
Also, I'll add that schools they all have, as Dan said, a department that handles accessibility and accessibility issues. It may operate under a different name, but they don't all operate at the same pace. So start early, because sometimes these things need to be approved by a committee, and that committee may only meet once or twice a month. And so sometimes these things can happen pretty slowly. Now, once they're in place, they're generally good for at least a school year, and then there's a meeting. Sometimes there's more requirements. Sometimes it's a meeting just to continue, see if any modifications are needed. But start the process early, because not all of these offices operate at the same pace.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the disability. So like with mental health, those things fluctuate. Something like dyslexia, it's not going away. So that's kind of like a one and done. So it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the nature of the disability, but it's also going to depend on the documentation requirements of the particular school that you're going to.
So moving along, and as we're talking about these things, next question is, how is medication handled typically at schools?
Medication. Wow. You're going to need to do your homework. On this one, you're going to need to do your homework. Some schools, especially the larger schools, may have a health and wellness center that includes doctors and includes psychiatric care. So your counseling services center may include some of that too. So you're going to have to see which one handles those particular requests. And if the school does not have that, then are you going in-state? Are you going to somewhere where you can have telehealth, so you can get your medications sent to you to do that? So sometimes, like if you're in Georgia and you go to West Virginia, you can't see your doctor in Georgia anymore. And so how does that get played? I don't want you to not go to West Virginia, to a school in West Virginia, if that's where you want to, but can you get what you need in West Virginia? That's really kind of the question. And that depends on the school. That depends on the size of the school, but also the services that the counseling services or the health and wellness center may have. And it really depends. And you may have to check with your insurance as well to do that, to see if that's an out-of-network kind of provider, or if it's an in-network provider, or if there's some kind of special arrangement where you're going off to school in West Virginia and they can do some plan in West Virginia. So it's a complex set of circumstances that you're going to need to do an awful lot of homework on. So when you are touring the school, that's probably a question you need to ask.
So picking right back up on that, how do you find the colleges that do have the good support, the Office of Disabilities that are actually good, and where your student will get the help that they really need?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how to grade it, to be quite honest. I don't know how to grade that. I can tell you that everybody that does the accessibility work wants you to get the particular accommodations that you need. What's reasonable for you? They want that to happen. They don't want, it's not a barrier process. It's not people put in there to go ahead and put administrative kind of barriers on stuff. No, we want to get rid of all of that stuff. We want to make it as easy as possible so you can do what you need to do for yourself. Services in and of itself are good things, but the other caveat to that is they can have great services, but your student may not ever access them. That's on them. So the services have to also meet what the student needs, but the student also has to understand, I need to be able to access that independently and know when, where, how, and why I need to access those particular services. Good services depend on, well, two things. One, the fact that they exist for your student in the way that your student may need them at certain points in time. But the second part of that equation is your student needs to be making that decision to walk that walk, to go to counseling services, to go to the accessibility office, to go to the academic resource center, to make sure that they have a tutor in the class that they need, and do that in at least as much ahead of time as you possibly can. Good That's not something I can grade. It's not something I can grade. I can tell you the students that go to it and really are very great advocates for themselves will have great outcomes. So if they have a bad tutor, guess what they're doing? They're going ahead and getting a different one. They're not staying with something that doesn't work. And they're not blaming themselves for that. They're just saying, hey, I have this need. This person just doesn't, I don't jive with them. Can you give me somebody else? That kind of stuff is really up to the student to get that particular good outcome, let's say. But I've never met an academic resource center or any other services that don't want to help.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that we work with a number of college counselors that are very well versed in the colleges and their support systems and where the best schools are for kids with different various learning differences. And they also will help them with figuring out if they're going to need an executive functioning coach, like someone like us that would continue to work with the student, or what other supports are local if they need, right there. So if anyone on this needs college counselor recommendations for your child who has learning differences, feel free to reach out. Happy to share those with you. I do think that there's some phenomenal folks around that work all around the country that I think can help guide you a little more than, with where this school might be a good fit for your student, as well as those strong support services on campus.
Yeah, and Dan, I just want to underscore something really important that I think that you said, which is that once kids make that transition to college, while these services are there and these people are wanting to help and are available to help and those resources are there, it is on the students to advocate for themselves and actually take advantage of those resources. So for example, if a student has been cleared for extended time or to take tests in a testing center that's separate from the rest of the class, alone or something like that, it is on the student. The professor will be aware, but it is not on the professor to get a copy of the test over to the Center for Students with Disabilities office and reach out to the student to schedule a time to come in and take that test alone per their accommodation. It is on the student to reach out to the professor a week before the test and say, I would like to take advantage of this accommodation that I've been cleared for. Can you please send a copy of the test over to this person? And then the student needs to make sure that that was received by that office and schedule a time to come in and take the test. That's just one example, but I just want to underscore what you said, because I think that's a really important point and represents a big transition from pre-college to college. A lot of that scaffolding is not there, and while the resources are there and the folks there are at the ready and willing to help, it's on students to take the initiative. And that's where an executive coach, like us, come in. Is we work with a lot of college students and help them in that advocating for themselves. Have you talked to this office yet? What's coming up? Have you talked to that professor yet? Et cetera. And oftentimes students are at that age are more interested in doing that, perhaps with a coach than with, mom or dad. So something to keep in mind.
We have another question, and then I'm gonna put up Dan's information again, and then put up our information just because as we're nearing to 1 o'clock. But this is, I think, a great question. Mom is trying to figure out how to help a student with ADHD navigate a big college where they're at, and are there things that can be done to make it easier other than what you've already mentioned? I definitely think what Evan said just about executive function coach who's sort of there and helping pace them and plan out their days and making sure that, for example, they're going to go and talk to the support that, Dan's explained is there, is one. But Dan, what else can you add to that?
Navigating, this is a normal issue. So I'm just going to normalize it. Even students that don't have executive functioning kind of issues, they sometimes don't know where to go. So I would get students that don't have, executive function issues, and they'd say, who's my advisor? I'm like, okay, now I know where to go, right? So as long as that student has one person where they know they can, or one place on campus where they know they can get that answer, they can go to that one place and start that navigation process. If it's knowing different things. We have one place on our campus where it's just a one-stop shop. So if you need to do different things, or you're kind of like, hey, where's the counseling services center? They'll be able to tell you. Some place on a large campus may have that. Some may not, unfortunately. So this is where you get into, do they have academic coaching there, or do they have a student services center or something like that can help navigate some of those particular issues where it can be something like a one-stop shop. If in fact it's not, student handbook is always a great place and a great resource to get information as to where to go, who to talk to, and where it's located on campus. Some larger campuses, it may be 20 minutes across campus, and that's by bus. So it may be something where they need to navigate some of their time to devote to that. So that may help.
Awesome. And I think with that, we have all of the questions answered. Is there anything else, Evan, Dan, you want to add at all?
Just by saying, everyone who has joined us today, this is a big step. You're here because you're interested in the topic. And so take the information that this wonderful information Dan has shared, and we've tried to help add some tidbits and do something with this information. This is great information. It's real. I personally have my own learning differences and had accommodations through college, and I know how it works at my college, but it works differently, and the offices are named differently, but all schools have these resources, and this is really critical information. The only thing that I'll add is, for neuropsych testing or psychoeducational testing, in addition to a diagnosis, there are some pages at the end that the tester will offer some recommendations for accommodations and et cetera. That is heavily offices when they consider approving certain accommodations that are being requested. Something that there are some accommodations like extended time that students may have had pre-college that they would continue to benefit from in college. However, there are also some accommodations that may not have made sense pre-college that your students would really benefit from, and their diagnoses justify that. For example, priority registration, right? So in college, there are seniors have top priority. So there's a date that registration opens. Seniors have the top priority and first pick of their courses, and then juniors, and then sophomores, and then freshmen. If you get cleared for something like priority registration, because that process can be very hectic, and for students with learning differences and colleges that are larger, there may be 3, 4, 5, 6 different professors that offer the same course. Some are one day for 3 hours, some are 1 hour 3 times a week, some are an hour and a half twice a week. And there's all these wonderful ways to research professors, rate my professor, et cetera, to see a student's learning style. This professor lectures more. This professor uses PowerPoints. This professor, has some incremental homework assignments, and it's not just, a project and a paper and 2 tests, and that's it for the whole semester. And so you can research professors in a way that you just couldn't, 15, 20 years ago. And for students who learn a certain way and need a professor who teaches a certain way in order to have an equal chance to be successful and demonstrate what they know, they can go in, and that process can be very stressful. And coming in as a freshman, having the lowest priority, now you're not, all of a sudden a class is full and this professor is really popular. So if you get cleared for something like priority registration, you can register even before the seniors. And if you plan ahead and know what professors and what classes and what professors are teaching those classes and the times and days that you want, you're basically guaranteed that schedule, and it takes a huge load of stress off. Well, if you did your testing midway through high school, that might not have even been on the radar. And so you can go back to the tester and say, if my paperwork and diagnoses justify certain accommodations such as X, Y, and Z, could you add that to the report and send it to me, and then provide that report, to the school? So keep that in mind also. There are some accommodations that students might really benefit from and are justified by their diagnoses, but just haven't come up in conversation and didn't really make sense pre-college. So keep that in mind. And, I think that's helpful information too.
We actually have a follow-up on one of the questions that about the medication. The question was, I interpreted it wrong, but the question is actually, since some kids are on several medications that include stimulants, does that get managed by the kids themselves, or is there a health room or clinic where they can take the medication? And Dan, you can answer this. If you want to jump in real quick and answer this, that would be great.
Yeah, no, it's all independent. It's all on them.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, just to end off, thanks for being here. I really appreciate, thanks for having me, and thanks for showing up. And to piggyback off of what Evan said, yeah, there's accommodations that may not be, were appropriate before, but your accommodations people at your school will help you navigate a lot of that. And if it makes sense, it makes sense. Just because an evaluator said you need priority registration, if it doesn't make sense, I'm not approving it. And so that's part of the walk that you need to do with the accessibility people, that if it doesn't mean access for you, it's probably not going to get approved. But if it does, and it sort of meets that nexus, like, hey, I have this particular issue and I need this, and this makes sense, priority registration, for example, may kind of work for that. Not everybody needs distraction reduction. Not everybody needs extra time. And so it's very individually specific. So knowing what's specifically appropriate for you is the key, and doing that prep work way ahead of time, and doing the prep work to know the services, but also the office, and know what accommodations may work for you. Doing that prep work way ahead of time will answer an awful lot of these particular concerns, and help you navigate those in a way that makes sense for you and your student.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that you're very busy, so it's wonderful to have you here. And up on the screen, you guys, is more information about Dan. He's at accessingcollege.com. And feel free to reach out to him for your needs as well. And we're always here to help on the executive functioning front, and to connect you with folks that support kids with learning differences. So you can always reach out to us. I did have the screen up there. Hopefully some of you guys grabbed that. And if you ever need to reach out, you can get us through social media or email or a text or a phone call. So we look forward to continuing to support you. If after this discussion you want some references to college counselors or anyone else, feel free to reach out to Dan, Evan, or myself. And we look forward to hosting the next Less Stress Parenting webinar soon.